How you doing, guys? Dr. Thompson here. I'm going to show you, I'm taking something right now, and I'm going to show you why. Hopefully you can see that. High CBD extract, all right? And it's perfect for today because we're going to talk about stress today. You guys are probably wondering why I'm going live on a Tuesday. I normally don't, and you're right. Normally I don't go live on Tuesday, and I'm going to tell you why I'm going live on a Tuesday. So we had actually an inflammation event scheduled for our office, and we had, I think, 10 people registered for it, and we had tornado warnings all afternoon, and in Illinois in November, and so people were like, I'm not coming in if there's a tornado warning. And we're like, yep, I probably don't blame you. I probably wouldn't want to be out in a tornado right now as well. So normally right now I would be doing an inflammation talk, but that actually got pushed back. We pushed them off online to our webinar. So right now they're watching it on a webinar. And so instead I have this scheduled out as a talk, so I wanted to share my time since it's already been scheduled, it's already been blocked out, and I wanted to share my time with you guys. So hopefully you guys don't mind. I always appreciate you guys watching. So what I'm going to go over with you is something I don't talk a lot about, but I think this is super important, especially during today's times. Okay, let's talk about stress. Let's talk about stress. Let's be really honest. And let's talk about the response of stress and why it does in fact cause so much illness, sickness, and disease. And the reason why I want to talk about it tonight is, obviously, if you look at today's atmosphere with everything that's going on, I think people would agree that people are experiencing a lot of stress. And I know this, and I'm actually going to show you how I know people are actually stressed. Even by just touching their spine, I know that they're stressed because I understand stress physiology and what happens, systemically all over the body. But give me a thumbs up if you are stressed. And I want to make sure you watch this, obviously, all the way to the end. I'll give you some tips on what you can do for you to be able to just handle this stress right now a little bit better. Now, we're always going to have some kind of stress in our life. There's no question about it. For you to be 100% stress-free, it's impossible. So you got to do some things to be able to kind of scatter it out and to try to dissipate it just a little bit. But I'll show you at the end some of the things that I do as well. But I will actually say this, is when people say, Dr. Nate, do you ever have stress? I say, well, I do have stress, but just remember this. Stress is not stress until you call it stress. So I do have issues, I do have challenges, I do have those things that take place in my life, but I also refuse to have a stress response from it, even though there's some things that are challenges and things like that, okay? So we all have challenges, we all have issues. It's just some people just are willing to call it stress so much faster. So I'm going to talk to you about stress. I want you to understand what stress looks like in the body, what it does to the body, so that maybe if you guys are having stress response right now, you're going to know what to do, but you're also going to understand what's happening inside your body, so that if you start seeing some changes in your body, you don't get freaked out. You understand, oh my gosh, I'm having a stress response. So before we get into it, I'll tell you why today, I'm not necessarily a stressful day, but it's just been a really bizarre type day. And I'll tell you about my day. You can tell me about your days if you'd like as well. But just with things like, COVID, that's stressing a lot of people out. It stresses me out too a little bit. You look at the election, a lot of people, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, people are stressed out about it as well. They're uncertain, all right? So all of this is just producing a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty can produce a lot of anxiety. Anxiety is going to produce a stress response. But even like today for me, here we had an event that we had planned, and that got canceled. I actually got a letter in the mail today that somebody had stolen my identity and had filed an unemployment claim as me against the business that I own, which means if that goes through, the state of Illinois is going to be paying unemployment claims to someone who claims they're me, and I'm the one who's actually going to be paying it. So just weird and just bizarre. We'll get it handled. We'll get it, taken care of. But it's just, you see all these things obviously start to pile up as well. So maybe you feel the same, same way as well. But let's talk about stress, because not a lot of people, people will say they're stressed, but the question is what on earth are you doing to try to dissipate it or try to handle it as well? And one of the reasons why is, guys, you can go to the CDC website, and here's what the CDC says, Centers for Disease Control. They're not right about a lot, but they are right about this. They say that 90% of doctors' visits are actually due to mental stress, guys. And so listen, is there a component to disease when it comes to mental stress? 100%. And yes, women are affected by stress much more than men are, especially, although chronic stress can bring both men and women down, can bog it down, but especially when there is acute stress, it is going to affect a woman much quicker, okay? So all of these different things that you can see up here, all of these can be related to mental stress on its own. Hormones, fertility, poor sleep, low testosterone, weight gain, digestive issues, heart disease, depression, having a low functioning thyroid. All of these things can be related to stress. So this is why you can do all you want when it comes to handling physical stressors. You can do all you want when it comes to handling chemical stressors. Inflammation, food allergies, digestive system, all these other things as well. But if you don't ever handle the mental aspect of stress, it doesn't matter what you do, especially ladies, you are going to stay sick. And this is why you have to start addressing mental stress, or at least start doing things to try to block it from a physiological level as well, okay? And here's what I like to call what stress is, all right? I call stress death from 1,000 paper cuts, all right? And this is the reason why, is that when it comes to stress, the reason why so many people are so bad at handling stress is because it's never just one thing. And you've ever heard the term death from 1,000 paper cuts, it's like one paper cut doesn't kill you, neither does two, neither does 500, maybe not 700, but 1,000. Enough of these tiny little stressors that take place, and that is actually once it gets to the point where it's too overwhelming for the body. So when you guys look at stress, it's never just one stressor. Very rarely do we have this giant stressor that takes place that doesn't allow our body to be able to heal and adapt the way that it's supposed to. And this is why, if you look at it, you'll see all these little stressors that are building up in almost every single person's life. It's almost universal. I mean, think about it. A lot of people are concerned and they're worried about COVID. Maybe not from a health standpoint. I'm not worried about it from a health standpoint. But maybe some people might be worried from a health standpoint. They might be worried from an economical standpoint. They might be worried about their job. They may be worried about, some of the repercussions. They might be worried about being forced to get a vaccine, whatever it might be. And then you have, the election, and that's another stressor. And then you might have stressors with your family. You might have stressors at your job. You might have all these different stressors. And really, when it comes to stress, the reason why we're so bad at it is because we're not identifying all of these stresses, how they're starting to add up. And this is why we call, stress death from 1,000 paper cuts, all right? But I want to tell you something, okay? I want to ask you something. And I want to give you a scenario, okay? So let's say that right now, wherever you're at, or let's say we look at this, we see that there's a room on fire, okay? And this will help you to understand really what the stress response is, to see so you can understand what's going on from a health perspective inside your body in relation to stress. So let's say you're sitting in this room right now, and then all of a sudden, we close the doors, we lock the window, we lock the doors, we shut off all the lights, we light a fire in there. And so at that moment, and this fire is taking place, this fire is happening, and the doors are locked, you're trying to get out, and you guys are going to understand you're going to have a massive stress response. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a good thing. So you're going to notice your blood pressure starts to elevate. You're going to notice that your heart's going to start beating faster. You're going to notice you're going to start breathing quicker. You're going to start to notice that you're going to start having a rush of adrenaline. Your eyes are going to dilate. Your extremities are going to get very strong, because that response is actually beautiful in some kind of acute crisis to help you try to get out of this emergency. So you may develop superhuman strength to actually punch through a wall or do something like that. But let's say we keep you in there for 10 minutes, all right? And then at the end of the 10 minutes, you've had this massive stress response. And then we open the door, we have a medical doctor there, and we take you out, and then we do all of your blood work, all right? So we do blood work and we take your vitals. We're looking at your respiration and you're breathing super heavy. We take your blood pressure and it's 210 over 130. We measure your blood cholesterol and we notice that your cholesterol levels have skyrocketed. And let me ask you a question. At that moment, if you looked at that blood work, you looked at your blood pressure, would any medical doctor in their right mind ever say, yep, you have high blood pressure, yep, you have high cholesterol, you need to be on a statin drug and you need to be on an ACE inhibitor for the rest of your life because now you have hyperlipidemia and then you also have high blood pressure. So here's your drugs, be on it for the rest of your life. And just thinking that, you think that would be absolutely crazy because the reason why is because a lot of times a doctor doesn't know the context as far as why you have high blood pressure or why you have high cholesterol, because that is actually an appropriate response to stress. So how many times have you ever gone to the doctor and are they even asking you about stress? Most of the time, they're just looking at your blood work and saying, yeah, whatever, yeah, stop stressing or stop eating so much and just maybe eat better and exercise, but here's your drugs. If you don't fix it, I'll up the prescription. So you guys understand that when that happens, you have that response. That is actually a normal, appropriate response when it comes to stress. Exactly. So let me show you the biochemistry. And guys, I'm going to tell you something. I hated biochemistry when I was in school. I hated all of it. I hated chemistry. Now I actually really love it and I enjoy it because it really helps you to understand why some of these things are actually happening in the body. So remember, let's look at the top left part of that screen. And when you look at that, you have a stressor, okay? Now I'm going to talk about mental mostly, but guys, you can also have chemical stressors, you can also have physical stressors. But let's say that you have some kind of mental stressor, like you're locked in a room that's on fire, okay? So your nerve system actually perceives this stress. So it perceives it via your senses. So it perceives it on the skin. It perceives it through your eyes. It perceives it through your nose. It perceives it through your ears. It perceives it through the nerve system. It also perceives a threat based off of past experiences or memories. And this is why, if you've ever gotten into a situation where it's like, this shouldn't be a stressful situation, but I'm really stressed out about it because maybe you've had some really bad things happen based off of memory. And it also has triggered that. And so where this stress response actually starts is within the deep brain known as the limbic system. Okay, then those messages, those neurons then send a message to what's known as your hypothalamus. So hypothalamus, very deep embedded neurons deep inside the brain. And this is actually, guys, where your whole entire hormone system originates, is within your hypothalamus. So you guys understand there's always, when it comes to hormones, there's a neurological component to this. So it's in the hypothalamus. It then sends another response to your pituitary gland. Now here's what happens when it comes to stress. There's two different types of response. The first one, you send a message via your hormones. So pituitary actually releases adrenocorticotropin hormone, ACTH, and that will actually go through the bloodstream in order to affect your adrenal glands to produce the hormone cortisol. So it takes a little bit of time for that to happen. Now, the one that you're going to have in a very acute type stress, that you have this immediate response, actually happens through your sympathetic nerve system. So this sympathetic nerve system actually goes down the sympathetic trunk that runs down along the front of your spine, right in the front of the spine. And that actually will go into the adrenal gland, the inner part of the adrenal gland, the neurological part of that adrenal gland. And that's when you have any kind of stress response, that's when you get that adrenaline, okay? And you get that feeling like boom, and you're like, oh, I was just scared. And you have that neurological response, and then you notice in about 2 or 3 seconds after that release of adrenaline, you start to notice that the physiology of your body starts to change. Your heart starts to go, starts to beat a lot faster. You start breathing faster. You start to notice your muscles start to tighten and things like that. And that's a very quick response, but a long-term response is the release of cortisol. So here's what happens as a response. I want you to think of this, okay? And what could actually happen every time that you have a stress response, all right? So it's going to increase your blood sugar, okay? So the release of cortisol and the release of catecholamines like adrenaline, norepinephrine, epinephrine, actually starts to mobilize sugars. And that's actually a really good thing. The reason why is you mobilize sugars is you're going to need energy to run, jump, get away from this situation. So you better have some level of energy that's ready to go. You're also going to have constriction of blood vessels, all right? So you'll have some blood vessels open up, but you also have some blood vessels start to constrict, okay? The ones that actually start to restrict are around anything that you don't need to survive. So the ones that start to open up are the things that you need, like your extremities to lift, run, jump, things like that. But the ones that actually constrict are actually going to be a lot around your vital organs or things that you just don't need right now. Like, for example, your digestive system. You don't need to digest food when you're having some kind of a crisis or some kind of emergency. So you're going to have an increased blood pressure. Wow, you mean to tell me when I'm under stress, I'm going to increase my blood pressure, and is that a good thing? Absolutely, because you need that heart to pump harder in order to deliver nutrients and oxygens to all of those extremities so that you can get the required energy, required muscle contraction, and things like that to be able to handle the stress. You'll also will have digestion will go down. It will actually slow it down completely. So you will not produce stomach acid. You'll shunt the blood away from your gastrointestinal system. And actually the movement of food will shut down completely. It doesn't care at that moment about digesting your dinner if you are stuck in a room that's on fire. You'll also will see tightening of muscles. So if you ever notice this, is when you get stressed, I have a lot of people tell me like, oh, when I'm stressed, I feel it in the back of my neck and I feel it like in my traps and things like that. Well, one of the reasons why your muscles, especially around your spine, why they tighten is actually to protect you. So it's actually to protect actually the most important organ inside your body, which is going to be the brain, the spinal cord, and the spine and all of that neurology. And if it's tightened up, it offers some level of protection against that. But the other reason why having tightened muscles is really good is just think of this. Tight muscles can contract quicker and react quicker than muscles that are nice, loosey and goosey, all right? If that's even a word. But you're also long-term, you're gonna have a decreased inflammatory response, and that's also short-term a good thing. And you're gonna notice when you get super stressed, you also get sick because you actually decrease the immune system response. And one of the good things about this, when it's short-term, is listen, if you get like your arm bit off, you don't want to have a massive inflammatory response and things that get all swollen and whatever during that time. So you don't want the immune system to be super active during this time if you're trying to get out of the room or maybe if you are trying to run away from the bear, okay? Now, all of those different things that I just showed you, those are actually incredible things. They're amazing things because all of that, if you have a bear that's chasing you, so if you have a bear that's chasing you, all of those responses are appropriate. All of those responses are amazing. All of those responses are there to help you survive and to help you live as long as possible. So I want all of those responses if a bear is chasing me. However, raise your hand if you've ever had a bear chase you, or raise your hand if you ever had a mountain lion chase you, or raise your hand if you've ever been locked in a room that was on fire. And chances are none of you have had any of those things happen because we live in a different type of environment than our ancestors did 2,000, 3,000 years ago, okay? And so the thing is that our body does not differentiate whether something is real stress or perceived stress. And let me give you an example. If a bear's chasing me right now, that's a real stress. It's a real stress. However, if you are stressed about the presidential election, if you are stressed about COVID, if you're stressed about your finances, if you're stressed about your relationship with your wife or your kids or your spouse, whatever you're stressed about, remember all of those things, the body says it's a stressor. Whether it's real stress that is a threat to your life or whether it is perceived stress, like those things that we stress about that aren't necessarily, some kind of acute could be an acute insult on our life. All of those perceived stressors, the response that the body does is always the same. So it's always the same response. So again, the body doesn't say, you know what, you're stressed about this, it's not a real stress, and I'm not going to have a stress response. So whether a bear is chasing you or whether you're having all of these other, stresses about what's going on in your life, the body's response is actually always the same. Now, when that stress becomes long-term, what are the things you're going to see is you're going to see an increase in this hormone known as cortisol, okay? Cortisol is a great hormone during stress. In fact, if you look at your circadian rhythm, Cortisol follows a rhythm, so it should actually wake you up in the morning. It's going to increase your energy, especially late morning into the early afternoon, and then it starts to taper off afterwards. And then at night, if you have good cortisol rhythm, you should have no issues going to bed at night. But let's say that you're undergoing a lot of acute stress, whether it's physical, mental, whether it's chemical. Here's what happens. So cortisol on the brain, high levels are going to impair memory. Number two, when you have a high amount of cortisol as well, excuse me, you are going to have a lot of muscle and connective tissue breakdown, all right? So one of the things that the body says is we're going to get energy from whatever, which means that you can really start to break down your muscles and your connective tissue and your bones. And one of the reasons why too as well is because high cortisol will actually inhibit what's known as human growth hormone, which is responsible for repair and rebuilding, regeneration. This is super important to make sure you're getting enough growth hormone, especially at night when you're going into deep sleep. It will also be involved with energy control, okay? So one of the things that happens is anytime you're having a cortisol response is your body's going to start to mobilize sugars, which then it's going to require an insulin response. And if you keep that happening habitually and chronically, you're also going to have a lot less blood sugar sensitivity, a lot less insulin sensitivity, which is why that even with type 2 diabetes, there can be a mental stress response. Just a mental stressor when it comes to losing blood sugar sensitivity as well. So yes, type 2 diabetes can be due to mental stress. You're gonna decrease your natural killer cells big time, so it's going to impair the immune system and impair, especially your innate immune system response. It's gonna impair detoxification, so you can get a more buildup of more of those toxins, and it's gonna inhibit the release of detoxification, whether it's your hormones, whether it's medications, whether it's heavy metals, whether it's high fructose corn syrup, whether it's trans fatty acids, whatever it might be, anything that the liver needs to actually filter and be able to get rid of. It's going to actually cause issues with metabolism. So how many people actually know that when you start to have hypercortisol, too much cortisol, that will actually signal the body to start to store fat around the hips, around the waist, and around the thighs. In fact, you'll actually notice that when people have a lot of cortisol response, especially because they over-exercise, you will actually notice that they start putting on cellulite. In fact, there's research out there that actually says that too much cortisol is actually one of the reasons why women struggle with cellulite, okay? Which is really the reason why if you're exercising, you should keep it very short and very intense and not long drawn out that's requiring a long-term cortisol response. So it's going to impair recovery too. So if you got a high amount of stress, if you ever wake up in the morning and you're just like, oh man, I just don't feel well. I just don't feel recovered. I just don't feel like I don't feel fresh in the morning. This can be due to having a high amount of cortisol, okay? You're also going to see a problem with your sex hormones, all right? Especially with progesterone. This is huge, guys, because if you start to become deficient in progesterone, because cortisol starts to steal it away from progesterone, and then you actually have impaired detoxification, I mean, you can't clear out your estrogens. This is actually why you will have high estrogen, low progesterone, and that's one of the things they actually call estrogen dominance, okay? And then you're also gonna have decreased thyroid output, all right? So just remember, stress, thyroid output is basically just the thermostat that says, here's where my metabolism is at. If I'm undergoing stress, you're gonna go into energy conservation, which means the thyroid function starts to go down, and it wants to go down in order to conserve energy. Because if a bear has chased you and you are up in a tree, you don't know when the bear is going to let you go away so that you can climb down the tree. It's a good thing that you can start to conserve energy, especially if there's been long-term stressors, so that you start to decrease your metabolism so that you can actually hang on to energy stores as long as possible, okay? You're also going to have GI dysfunction, yes, called leaky gut syndrome. I don't love that term, but let's just say for what it is, it's leaky gut, which means you're going to have an increase in intestinal hyperpermeability, okay? So you can see that the stress response is great, but the long-term stress response is not good. There's going to be a huge, huge detriment to your health. And this is why, guys, if you would look at the scales, the more that you are demanding a cortisol response, the more that you are demanding an adrenaline response, the more that it's going to cause less in thyroid output, and it's also going to cause progesterone to go down as well. So this is why, ladies, if you have a poor liver function, you cannot metabolize your estrogens the way that you're supposed to, and you're stressed out, then you have your estrogen, your progesterone balance goes way off, and this is why you feel so absolutely awful. If you are actually stressed out and you do have a menstrual cycle, you are of that age, this is why when you have a high amount of stress, whether it's you're exercising too much, whether you have too much mental stress, you have too many physical stressors or chemical stressors that are going on as well, and you look at all those different things, you're going to see that you're going to become progesterone deficient. This is one of the reasons why, you might have a normal 2-week cycle, you ovulate, but if you're progesterone deficient, you cannot maintain that endometrium, which is why you have a menstrual cycle that's 23 or 24 days. You have a shortened cycle because your progesterone is going up in other areas. It's going towards the actual production of cortisol, okay? So, couple of tests. If you've never gotten your stress response tested, guys, get these things tested. So this is actually known as your cortisol response, your circadian rhythm. So remember, when you look at this, it's actually a buildup of cortisol. This is what's fascinating. A buildup of cortisol actually will start to happen at about the last half of your sleep. So actually in fact, I'm going to be doing a live about sleep, and this is absolutely amazing, is actually in the first half of your sleep cycle. So in the first, 3.5 to 4 hours, this is actually where you enter into a very deep sleep. And this is actually where your body releases growth hormone that's really designed for you to repair your tissues. And then in the last half, you don't go into deep sleep, you go into more REM sleep, rapid eye movement, and this is where your cortisol levels actually will start to go up, which means that your blood sugar will start to go up, and this is what actually wakes you up in the morning. So it starts to go up, and this is what gets you up in the morning, and then it starts to reach its peak in the late morning to early afternoon, and then it tapers off at night, finally being at its lowest amount. So, you have this gradual wind down and you don't have any issues going to bed. Now, when you look at this person, you can see absolutely sky high clear across the board. And then when you look at her free cortisol, her metabolized cortisol, you can see that they're absolutely through the roof. And you need a little bit of context in here, but yes, when you look at this person, they were undergoing a tremendous amount of acute stress, and guess what? The adrenal output was actually showing that as well. So I could look at this and see from looking at her cortisol, I said this, from looking at this, it looks like you're exhausted in the morning, and then you just, hit the ground running with tons of unbelievable stress. And then you get to at night and you can't fall asleep because your cortisol levels are so high. She's like, yep, you actually just showed that to a T. So you got to measure that cortisol because, again, this is a stress response as well. Another test that we do as well is a neurotransmitter test, all right? So when you guys actually see, when they say, well, doctors say that I have a brain imbalance of serotonin, I want you guys to know something is you cannot measure, there is no test that measures serotonin in the brain. There is no blood test that you can measure serotonin in the brain. It's impossible, all right? So, but yes, you can measure your neurotransmitters, right? You can measure things like serotonin. You can measure gamma aminobutyric acid. You can measure free glutamate. You can measure histamines. You can measure dopamine. You can measure epinephrine. You can measure all of these excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. And the reason why you can measure them is because they're not produced in the brain, they're produced in the body in specific organs. So the thing is that when you look at and you're measuring a person's neurotransmitters, you can actually trace it back to where that organ, which organ is producing a predominant amount of these neurotransmitters. And actually you can see that that organ is under a lot of stress. And you look at this person, this is an 11-year-old boy, and you can see serotonin levels are through the roof, and like a precursor to serotonin is also through the roof. And I looked at that and I said, your son has tremendous amount of anxiety, doesn't he? And he says, yep, terrible anxiety, because remember, if you have way too much serotonin, you're gonna have anxiety. If you have underactive serotonin levels, then you tend to be a little bit depressed. But you could also see some of these other neurotransmitters like glutamate, histamines, which we'll see this with a lot of food allergies, high amounts of dopamine. norepinephrine, things like this poor little kid, little boy, was absolutely stressed out beyond like you could imagine. And so the good thing is you can actually measure it. You can measure it looking at cortisol. You can measure it looking at peripheral neurotransmitters, and then you can trace it back and really say, hey, here's probably where we need to test, because these are the organs that are undergoing a lot of stress, whether it is some kind of physical stressor or chemical stressor, but also you'll see this altered when there's a lot of mental stressors that are going on as well. Absolutely fascinating, all right? So let me give you a tip on what you can do. So if you haven't gotten tested, guys, make sure you get tested. Holy cow, because it is absolutely fascinating how stress, mental stress, how it affects your health, especially for women, especially. And guys, if your doctor is not addressing mental stressors, I will tell you this, find a new doctor, please, because you are missing out. You are missing out on a huge component of you having a restoration, not just manipulation as well, okay? So you notice when I started off, I took some things in order to help block a stress response. So yes, there are some things that you can do, because guys, you can say, I don't believe in stress. I'm not going to be stressful. Everything is good. I'm going to clap and I'm going to put on a happy face. But in reality, let's just be honest, is yes, I still get stress. I may handle it better than a lot of people, but yes, in fact, I still do get stressed. So what are some of the best things that you can do in order to, especially if you're saying, I'm going through a stressful spot right now, the best thing you can do is remember, where does stress originate? It actually originates through your nerve system, but it originates actually in the hypothalamus. So yes, you can take some things and some herbs that do a wonderful job of actually blocking the stress response inside your body. So it actually will block that cortisol response. It will block the adrenaline response. It can block those things at the level of the brain. So things like kava are great. CBD oil. My personal favorite is actually California poppy, all right? So I want you to think of this, California poppy and also L-Sidonian. They all work a little bit differently, okay? And there's a reason why we use each one. But one reason why I like California poppy, probably the best, is that it actually will stop the stress response at the level of the brain, and it does a wonderful job of making you feel very calm and very relaxed. So think of this, it's kind of like a bottle of wine, or not a bottle of wine, like having a glass of wine without the effect of alcohol and without the effect of all the sugar that wine has. So I want you to think, a lot of people today are in this, they're in this cycle where they actually drink wine, or they have a drink or two at night in order to calm them down. And what that does is it will try to calm down the stress response. And I'll go into it probably in December about why that's a really bad idea, because how it interferes with sleep cycle big time. But it will calm them down, and then because that alcohol interferes with their sleep cycle and the quality of sleep that they have, then they actually wake up absolutely exhausted in the morning because their cortisol isn't high enough. So then they go and start having 4 and 5 Starbucks just to wake themselves up to try to get those cortisol levels back up. And so a lot of times it becomes more and more and more. So it's more alcohol at night, more caffeine in the morning, and they're just undergoing this vicious circle that they can't get out of. So instead of alcohol, one of the things that you can do is you can have California poppy, and that will help to blunt the stress response inside the body. And this is why I absolutely love it so much. This is why anytime I do a talk, it's California poppy, because I hate speaking. I hate speaking. If you saw me 10 years ago, I hated it so much. It would stress me out so much. And I still do. I'm just better at it. But having California poppy just helps me to calm down, and it helps me to relax a little bit. So guys, what do you think? And last thing, I want to leave you with this, all right? So yes, California poppy is awesome. California poppy is amazing. Reach out to us, messages. If you want some, I'll give you, the code that you can get California poppy for. But also, I want you to remember this, okay? I want you to remember this. Is what you see up here is you see an umpire, all right? And so I want you to think of this scenario. It's the bottom of the ninth. The score is tied. You're up to bat. The count is 3-2. The bases are loaded. And there's one pitch that's coming at you. And you know that you're either going to strike out or you're going to win the game. And so the pitcher winds up, it throws the baseball, and you decide that you're not going to swing, and the catcher catches it, and all eyes are on that umpire, and he doesn't say anything. So everyone in the stands is looking at that umpire, and they ask the question, well, what is it? Is it a ball or is it a strike? And the umpire gets up from his stance, and he says, it ain't nothing till I call it. So what I want you guys to understand is that everything that happens, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's the election, whether it's what's happening in your family, whether what's happening with your job, what's happening with your kids, guys, it's nothing until you decide what to call it. And so this is why I handle stress so good when people say, how can you be calm during this time? Because I choose to call it something different. If you are choosing to call everything stress, your body will react to something that's stressful. But if you decide you're going to call it something different, like for me, I call it a learning experience, not a failure. I didn't fail. I've only just learned and I'm still moving forward. You get to decide, you get to choose what you are going to call it. So during this time right now, what are you going to call it? Are you going to call it stress? Or are you going to call this a learning experience, an opportunity for growth? It just depends on what you want to call it, just like this umpire. So I hope that makes sense for you guys. I hope you guys enjoy what talking about stress. And guys, hey, let me know if there's anything else that you guys want to know about. If you have any questions or anything like that, we can talk later on a live video or something like that. Just drop me a comment in the below. And guys, make sure when it comes to stress, if you found this very valuable, make sure that you share this with other people. All right, share this with other people. Help them to understand about stress. Help them to understand what's happening inside of their body. Help them to understand just the physiology behind it so that they understand what they could be going through, understand why they might have lost their menstrual cycle, or understand why they're having digestive issues, or understand why they're not sleeping very well. Because the first thing to start bring healing to the body is for them to understand why they're going through what they're going. Because the more that people know, the more they don't have to feel like a victim, that they are a victim to poor genetics, poor circumstances, or whatever. Once they start to understand it, it gives them the power to say, I can actually heal from this. So guys, I hope you guys appreciate this as well. Make sure you share this with other people. Barb, Matt, all those great people that are watching right now, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I love all of you. And thank you for letting me spend some time with you since our inflammation talk got canceled tonight. But again, I could have said that, life handed me lemons, but I decided to make lemonade out of it. And I appreciate you enjoying the lemonade with me tonight. So guys, be well. I hope you have a great Tuesday night, and we will talk soon.